The lake house belongs to us now, my mother-in-law Margaret announced, her voice cutting through the Sunday dinner silence like a knife. We're selling it tomorrow. I froze, my fork suspended midway to my mouth. The familiar dining room of my childhood home suddenly felt foreign, hostile even. My husband Thomas shifted uncomfortably beside me, but remained silent. You can't sell it, I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. That house has been in my family for generations. Margaret's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Actually, dear, we can. Your father left everything to Thomas when he passed, and as his parents, we're simply helping manage the property. My sister-in-law Victoria smirked from across the table. Don't be dramatic, Emma. It's just an old house. Besides, the property values around the lake have skyrocketed. It's time to cash in. I'm Emma Sullivan, 32, and 6 months ago, I lost my father to a sudden heart attack. Now I was about to lose the last piece of my childhood, the lake house where every summer memory I treasured had been made. Thomas, I turned to my husband, you can't let them do this. You know what that place means to me. Before Thomas could respond, Margaret waved her hand dismissively. The decision's been made. The realtor is coming tomorrow to list it. Victoria's husband James is in real estate, and he says we could get at least $2 million for it. Of course James was involved. My sister-in-law's husband had been eyeing the lake house since the day they got married. I could still remember his calculating gaze during our last family gathering there, how he'd walked the property line making notes on his phone. Dad would never have wanted this, I said, pushing away from the table. He loved that house. It's where he taught me to swim, where Mom spent her last summer before. Before she ran off with her yoga instructor, Victoria supplied helpfully, examining her manicured nails. Really, Emma, you need to let go of the past. The reminder of my mother's abandonment stung, but not as much as Thomas's continued silence. My husband sat there, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his dinner plate, avoiding my eyes. That's when I remembered my father's last conversation with me just days before his death. We'd been sitting on the lake house dock, watching the sunset. He'd been acting strange, distracted. Emma, he'd said, gripping my hand tightly. If anything happens to me, check the boathouse. The old one, not the new dock. Check it before it's too late. I dismissed his words then, attributing them to the melancholy that sometimes took him when we visited the lake. Now they echoed in my mind with new urgency. I need to get some air, I announced, standing up. Nobody tried to stop me as I grabbed my car keys and headed for the door. The drive to the lake house took exactly 23 minutes, just as it had when I was a child, counting the seconds until we arrived for summer vacation. The familiar gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled up to the weathered blue house that had been my family's haven for 4 generations. The sun was setting over the lake, casting long shadows across the lawn where Dad and I used to play catch. The porch swing where Mom used to read me stories still creaked in the evening breeze. Every inch of this place held memories, stories, pieces of who I was. The old boathouse stood at the edge of the property, separated from the newer dock by a small grove of pine trees. It had been Dad's refuge, his workshop where he'd spend hours tinkering with old boat motors and fishing gear. I hadn't been inside since before he died. The door stuck slightly, just as it always had. The familiar smell of wood, water, and old rope enveloped me as I stepped inside. Motion sensors flickered to life, illuminating the dusty interior. Everything was exactly as Dad had left it, his tools arranged meticulously on pegboards, fishing rods standing like sentinels in their rack, the ancient workbench covered with decades of projects. What was I looking for? Dad hadn't been specific, just said to check here. I ran my hands along the walls, looking for anything unusual. The wooden panels felt solid, unchanged. The floorboards creaked in their familiar pattern under my feet. I was about to give up when I noticed something odd about the workbench. The heavy old piece had been my great-grandfather's, passed down through generations. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but now, in the harsh fluorescent lighting, I noticed that one of the legs seemed slightly shorter than the others. Kneeling down, I examined the uneven leg more closely. There was a seam in the wood that didn't match the others, barely visible unless you were looking for it. My heart pounding, I pressed against it. A small compartment popped open in the bench's side, revealing a metal box and a yellowed envelope. With trembling hands, I opened the envelope first. Inside was a deed to the lake house property, dated 1923, and a letter in my father's handwriting. My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, something has happened to me and you've remembered to check the boathouse. I'm sorry for the mystery, but I needed to make sure these documents stayed safe. The lake house was never mine to leave to Thomas or anyone else. It belongs to you, has since the day you were born. Your great-grandmother Isabel made sure of that when she put the property in a protected trust. No one can sell it without your consent. Not me, not Thomas, not anyone. The original deed and trust documents are in this box, along with proof of the annual trust payments I've been making since you were born. Take these to Arthur Clean, my lawyer. He knows everything and will help you protect what's rightfully yours. I'm sorry I didn't tell you this sooner, but I saw how Thomas's family looked at our home, how they measured its worth in dollars rather than memories. I needed to make sure you'd have proof when the time came. The lake house is your legacy, Emma. It's where you learned to swim, where you fell in love with the water, where you became who you are. Don't let anyone take that from you. Love, Dad. I sat on the dusty boathouse floor, clutching a letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Even now, Dad was protecting me, protecting our home. My phone buzzed. Multiple messages from Thomas asking where I'd gone. One from Victoria warning me not to do anything stupid. I smiled, wiping away my tears. Tomorrow would bring confrontation, legal battles, maybe even the end of my marriage. But tonight, sitting in my father's boathouse with the proof of my inheritance in my hands, I felt stronger than I had in months. Let them come with their realtors and their plans. The lake house was mine, and I was ready to fight for it. The next morning, I walked into Arthur Klein's office precisely 10 minutes before Margaret's scheduled meeting with her realtor. Arthur, my father's lawyer and friend of 20 years, examined the documents from the boathouse with careful attention, his expression shifting from professional interest to barely concealed delight. Your father was quite thorough, he said, adjusting his reading glasses. The trust is ironclad. The property was placed in your name when you were born, with your father acting as trustee until you turned 35 or in the event of his death. So they can't sell it? I asked, needing to hear it confirmed. Not only can they not sell it, Arthur smiled, but they've been living there without proper authorization since your father's passing. Technically, they need your permission to even step foot on the property. My phone buzzed again, the 15th call from Thomas since last night. I'd spent the night at my best friend Kate's house, ignoring the increasingly frantic messages from my husband and his family. They're meeting with a realtor at 10, I told Arthur. Should we? Oh yes. He gathered the documents into his briefcase. I think we should definitely attend that meeting. We arrived at the lake house to find Margaret, Victoria, James, and Thomas standing in the driveway with a polished-looking realtor. The woman was gesturing enthusiastically at the property, probably describing its investment potential or development opportunities. Emma, Thomas started towards me, but stopped short when he saw Arthur. What's going on? Why is Dad's lawyer here? Margaret's perfectly composed face flickered with uncertainty. We're in the middle of a private meeting. Actually, Arthur stepped forward. This meeting is over. I have here, he patted his briefcase, documentation proving that this property belongs solely to Emma Sullivan, held in trust since her birth in 1991. The realtor's professional smile wavered. I'm sorry, but I was told the property was inherited by Thomas Sullivan. You were misinformed, Arthur said firmly, producing the trust documents. This house and the surrounding 5 acres have been in a protective family trust for 3 generations, with Emma as the sole beneficiary. Victoria's face reddened. That's impossible. Daddy Sullivan left everything to Thomas. Everything he owned, yes, Arthur agreed. But he didn't own this property. He was merely its trustee. I watched as Margaret's composure cracked. This is ridiculous. Thomas, call our lawyer. By all means, Arthur smiled. Though I should mention that any attempts to sell or modify the property without Emma's consent over the past 6 months could be considered attempted fraud. James, who'd been suspiciously quiet, suddenly looked uncomfortable. Vicky, maybe we should. No, Margaret's voice rose. This house is worth $2 million. We are not letting it slip through our fingers because of some ancient trust. $3 million, actually, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. That's what the latest property assessment showed. Dad told me before he died. He also told me about the developers who've been trying to buy it for years. The ones you've been meeting with, James. My brother-in-law had the grace to look ashamed. Victoria grabbed his arm. You said nobody knew about those meetings. Nobody was supposed to, I continued. Just like nobody was supposed to know about the plans to tear down the house and build luxury condos. Dad found out, though. That's why he made sure I knew where to find these documents. Thomas finally found his voice. Emma, why didn't you tell me about any of this? I looked at my husband of 5 years, really looked to him. Would it have made a difference? Would you have stood up to them? His silence was answer enough. Well, Arthur cleared his throat. I believe we're done here. Emma has some decisions to make about the property's future and about who will be permitted access to it. You can't just throw us out. Victoria protested. We've been living here since Daddy Sullivan died. Actually, she can, Arthur replied. And given the circumstances, I'd advise you to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Margaret turned to Thomas. Are you going to let her do this to us? To your family? I watched my husband, seeing him caught between loyalty to his controlling mother and his marriage, the same position he'd been in countless times before. I think, Thomas said slowly, we should do what Emma wants. For the first time since I'd met her, Margaret was speechless. The realtor, who'd been inching towards her car, finally made her escape. James followed shortly after, practically dragging a protesting Victoria with him. You'll regret this, Margaret hissed as she stormed past me. You have no idea what you're doing. Actually, I said, I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm protecting my home. After they left, Thomas and I stood in silence, watching the sun sparkle on the lake's surface. I'm sorry, he finally said. I should have stood up to them sooner. Yes, I agreed, you should have. What happens now? I thought about all the summers spent here, all the memories embedded in every corner of this property. I thought about Dad's workshop in the boathouse, Mom's garden by the kitchen window, the dock where I'd learned to fish. Now, I said, I decide who gets to be part of this home's future. And me? Thomas asked quietly. I turned to face him. That depends. Are you ready to choose between your mother's control and our marriage? Because I won't live like this anymore, Thomas. I won't spend my life waiting for you to find your backbone. He winced at my words but didn't argue. I should have listened when you talked about this place, about what it means to you. I got caught up in Mom's plans, in Victoria and James's talk about investment opportunities. I forgot about the memories. The question is, I said, what are you going to do now? Hans looked at the house, then back at me. I'd like to make new memories here, better ones. If you'll let me. It wasn't a complete solution, but it was a start. The next few months would bring changes, some painful, some necessary. Margaret and Victoria would fight, of course. They tried to contest the trusts, claimed Dad wasn't in his right mind, anything to get their hands on the property's value. But standing there with the lake house behind me, my father's letter in my pocket, and my husband finally choosing my side, I knew we'd weather whatever storms came our way. Arthur cleared his throat. Shall we go inside? We have some paperwork to discuss about the property's future management. I nodded, taking one last look at the lake. Somewhere, I hoped Dad was watching, proud that his daughter had found the strength to protect their family's legacy. Yes, I said. Let's go home. 1 year later, I stood on the dock of the lake house, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and pink. The past 12 months had brought more changes than I could have imagined, but standing here, I knew every battle had been worth it. As predicted, Margaret and Victoria hadn't gone quietly. They tried everything: legal challenges, emotional manipulation, even attempting to turn the local community against me with stories of how I'd stolen their inheritance. But Dad's trust proved unshakable, and Arthur's meticulous documentation shut down every challenge they mounted. Thomas surprised everyone, including himself, by standing firm. When Margaret showed up unannounced one morning, demanding he control his wife, he finally found his voice. Enough, Mom, he'd said, blocking her path to the house. Emma's right. This place isn't about money. It's about family, about memories. If you can't respect that, you don't belong here. It was the first time I ever seen Margaret speechless. She'd left in tears, and Victoria hadn't spoken to us since. But Thomas stood taller after that day, like he finally broken free of an invisible weight. We spent the spring renovating, not to increase property value, but to preserve memories. The boathouse became a proper workshop again, with Dad's tools cleaned and organized. I found his old project notebooks tucked away in corners, filled with sketches and plans for improvements he'd wanted to make. Thomas took a particular interest in those notebooks. "Your dad was brilliant," he said one evening, poring over the detailed drawings. "These design modifications for the dock's support system. They're years ahead of their time." It was the first time he'd shown genuine appreciation for something my father had created, rather than just seeing the property's monetary worth. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Summer brought unexpected healing. Kate, my best friend who'd sheltered me that crucial night, suggested we restart the tradition of summer weekend gatherings. At first, I was hesitant. The house had been so contentious, it felt strange to fill it with laughter again. But that first weekend, watching our friends' children chase fireflies across the lawn where I used to play, something shifted. The lake house wasn't just a battleground anymore. It was becoming a home again. Even some of Thomas's extended family chose sides unexpectedly. His cousin Sarah, who'd always kept her distance from Margaret's drama, started visiting regularly with her kids. "This is what Uncle John always wanted," she told me one afternoon, watching her children learn to fish off the dock. A place where family could just be family, without all the politics and power plays. The biggest surprise came in late autumn. A letter arrived from Victoria, not a legal threat this time, but a genuine apology. James had accepted a job in California, and the distance had given her perspective. "I forgot what the lake house used to mean," she wrote, "before Mom started treating everything like an investment opportunity. I remember playing here as kids, how peaceful it was. I'm sorry we tried to take that away from you." I didn't respond immediately, but I kept the letter. Some bridges take time to rebuild. Today, watching the sunset, I heard familiar footsteps on the dock behind me. Thomas wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Penny, for your thoughts?" he asked. I smiled, leaning back against him. "Just thinking about everything that's changed. Remember what this place was like a year ago? You mean when my family was trying to sell your inheritance out from under you? When I was too spineless to stand up to them? When we almost lost everything that mattered? And now look at us." The lake house had transformed over the year, but so had we. Thomas had found his strength, standing up to his mother's manipulation. I'd learned to trust him again, watching him choose our marriage over family pressure. We turned Dad's old study into a home office, where Thomas now ran his consulting business. No more corporate job under his father's thumb. The guest rooms hosted regular visits from friends and chosen family. The kitchen echoed with laughter during weekend brunches. "Did I tell you what Sarah's kids asked yesterday?" Thomas said. "They wanted to know if they could have their summer camp here next year. Apparently, their friends at school are tired of hearing about the amazing lake house." I laughed. Well, the boathouse would make a perfect craft studio, and Dad's old workshop could teach them about boat maintenance. This was what Dad had protected all along. Not just property, but possibility. The chance for new generations to build their own memories here. "I have something to tell you," I said, turning to face Thomas. "I found out yesterday, but I wanted to wait for the right moment." His eyes widened as I took his hand and placed it on my stomach. "Really?" he whispered. I nodded. "Due in February. Looks like the lake house will have a new generation to love it." Thomas pulled me close, and I felt wetness against my cheek. Happy tears from the man who once struggled to show any emotion against his mother's disapproval. Behind us, the sun dipped below the horizon, setting the lake aflame with color. Somewhere, I knew Dad was smiling. His letter in the boathouse hadn't just saved our home. It had given us the courage to build a new kind of family, one founded on love and memories rather than power and possession. The lake house stood sentinel behind us, its windows gleaming in the fading light. Not just a house anymore, but a legacy of love, stretching backward through generations and forward into a future bright with promise.